Carol watched Tubby in the side mirror. He wiped the dust from his eyes as he jogged down the road toward their car and the barn. Her daddy's face had turned red, and sweat was already beading along his jaw. More than once he had lit into her mother, chasing her upstairs with a rolled up newspaper, slapping it on the walls in his hand, making sounds like the house would come crashing in on all of them. One time he had put his shoes on the dining room table, and Carol's mother had said something about him still being countrified. He called her a blue blood bitch and told her she'd do the same thing if she'd gotten her first pair of shoes instead of a fur coat when she was 10 years old. When things got out of hand like that, Foster Jr. would come to Carol teary eyed and frightened, and she'd take him down to Uncle Clem's store for a lemonade. When they got back, their daddy had usually left the house. Carol would find her mother laid across her lounger in the bedroom, puffing a cigarette and flipping the pages of Look, as if dismissing them one by one. Without a word or even sound, Carol would lie down beside her and wrap an arm around her waist. She never said a word out of fear that her mother would send her out. He cut the engine and turned to Carol without really seeing her. Now the sweat had mashed his black curls to his forehead. Carol could see that he was thinking about what to do and maybe wishing she were somebody who could help. He started the car again. Just as Tubby had almost caught up to them, her daddy put the car in reverse like he wanted to run Tubby down. When the car came roaring backwards towards him, Tubby stepped off the road, but it stopped, and her daddy yelled for Tubby to get in. Carol crawled into the back seat and let him up front. Tubby was breathing hard and smelled good, like rain and sweet hay. Carol even liked the sharp mentholatum smell of his snuff. Damn it to hell, Tubby. It's one thing to lose a horse overnight, but not a mare. First time due to foal, and soon, her daddy told him. They often drove the pastures to check horses. Those were slow, easy rides along the path that tires had pressed into the grass. This time he steered the car off the path, tearing over saplings and little mounds of horse droppings. The Buick bounced and thumped over the uneven ground below, knocking the people inside around in their seats. Two mares trotted to a far fence. She's hidden herself, God only knows where. They were going too fast, banging towards the back reaches of the farm. They swerved when her daddy bent over to find his lighter. He straightened the car and lit a cigarette. A drip of sweat rolled down the back of Tubby's neck into his shirt. His shirt was so worn Carol couldn't think of a name for its color. He had brown hair except for the almost invisible white hairs on the back of his neck that looked like the sun had bleached them. His head moved back and forth, searching out the front window and then the side window, but never looking out her daddy's side of the car. Tubby stammered about how he just knew the mare would come walking up any time. The car dipped and jolted through the bottom of a dry creek bed. Stones flew up, dinging the sides. It was thrilling and frightening, the way her daddy could squeeze everything down to one small, furious point. They stopped at the back 10 acres where the pasture sloped into a wide, muddy bottom called Flat Lick Bayou. Tubby walked south along the bottom while Carol and her daddy walked north. When her fingers brushed his, she slid her hand into her pocket. She hadn't held his hand in a year, maybe more. She couldn't remember. It was like trying to remember the last time you sucked your thumb or cried over spilling your ice cream. Some things just passed without any notice at all. When they walked by a thorny bramble, three small birds shot out of the bushes and flew up to the sky. And then they saw it, an unexpected curve of soft brown in the wet bog below. They crossed through some overgrowth on the edge of the bayou to get closer to the mare. She was laid out on the lone, dry patch of earth along the other side of the water. Her belly rose and fell in a slow rhythm, and her eyes blinked lazily. Finding Betty Jack like this, alive but not moving, sent a shiver up Carol's back. Damn it to hell, damn it to goddamn hell, her daddy said, stopping at the edge of the water. The water was still and the same dull red-brown as the mud. They were overdue for a rain. He looked for a place to cross and told Carol to get Tubby and the medicine bag. Tell him it's a broken leg. Tubby was already coming towards them. Carol hollered that they'd found Betty Jack and began to run toward her. And he began to run toward her, slow and gangly. As they passed, she pointed back down the bayou and told him about Betty Jack's leg. At the car, she tried to catch her breath, but the sharp smell of hot mustard greens burned her nose. She took the medicine bag and tried to run with it, but it was too heavy. When she made it back to Tubby and her daddy and poor Betty Jack, Carol stepped through the underbrush to get to the water, ignoring the scrape of thorny vines across her legs. Tubby stepped out to a stranded log in the middle of the bayou, to take the medicine bag from her. Her foot slipped into the mud, and she had to lift it out slowly. Is she okay? She asked Tubby. It's a tough one we've got here, Carol, her daddy answered. How about you? He was going to tell her to wait in the car, but he stopped. He had changed his mind. We won't be long. The summer Carol had turned 8, her daddy had called her to the back porch to see Penny birth her first litter of puppies. The 2 puppies that had already come out looked like rolled up socks with white and copper splotches. Penny licked them until the next one came and then set to licking it too. She watched Carol and her father with tired eyes, then started back licking each slick puppy over again until another came. Carol's daddy had run his hand down Penny's back and said he'd never lost a mother in childbirth. You mean dogs? Carol had sat down on the cool tile floor beside him and begun to move the lost mewing ones closer to Penny's swollen teats. No, I mean people. I couldn't abide it. It was the first time Carol had thought about the possibility of mothers dying in childbirth. It sounded like an unnatural and cruel idea made up just to frighten people. But Penny's worried look wasn't just about her puppies. It was about her own survival too. They watched her bird the rest of the litter, and Carol's daddy commented on the color and markings of each new one while he stroked Penny. Show dog quality, he said about the one with the prettiest face. Penny was just a bird dog mix, though. The puppies weren't purebred and could never be show dogs. A certain mother and a certain father. Only then would they be allowed in a real dog show. But Carol had understood what her daddy meant. 6 weeks later, motioning to Penny, her father had told V.D. Hanks, "That's the bitch right there." Mr. Hanks had come by to pick out his next burger. Under the music from the radio, Carol had attempted to give shape to that word, bitch, that she'd understood to be a curse word. The way Betty Jack's long black tail splayed across the ground reminded Carol of the Chinese fans her mother kept in the smallest drawer of her dresser. Her daddy pulled out a syringe and a vial of yellow liquid. I have enough of this to knock her out, he told Tubby, and then we'll cut the foal out. Tubby looked at him. Well, what the hell else can we do? We've got to get it out while it still has a heartbeat. A pair of dragonflies buzzed near Carol and landed on a fat stick nearby. I should add, that's not the end of the story, but I'm stopping there.
Yes, ma'am. Now, I know for sure that I want to finish the story. If anybody else does, you can purchase the issue that story appears in via the link in the chat. And for doing so, I have yet another free issue to offer everybody. We will send you a free copy of the 2015 issue, which includes an interview with this year's final judge, Monique Trung. Just forward acknowledgement of your order of the 2021 print issue to NCLR staff at ecu.edu with a mailing address to claim your bonus issue. Next, we will hear from Rose Himber Howse. Rose is a 2021 to 23 Wallace Stegner Fellow in Fiction at Stanford University. She's a recent graduate of the MFA program at UNC Greensboro, where she served as fiction editor of the Greensboro Review. She's been awarded numerous fellowships and residencies, and her work appears or is forthcoming in Hobart, Carolina Quarterly, Sonora Review, and elsewhere. Tonight, she will read from Next to Godliness, which received honorable mention in 2020 and was published in NCLR's online edition in 2021. Josephine Humphrey said of this story, I particularly admire the ways in which these characters are made utterly convincing. Their dialogue is clever and realistic, and the main character, Meredith, is both strong and vulnerable. There are no missteps in the writing. Please welcome Rose Himber Howse.
Thanks so much. And Molly, that was beautiful. It's really lovely to follow you. And thanks to everyone too at NCLR who put this together. All right, so the story is called Next to Godliness. We're going to be a family, said Blake. He had this way of always turning up behind you. I whipped around and glanced from him to Wanda, my mother. She'd gained some weight and it looked good. Her arm was stretched out, fingers spread like the twig hands of a snowman. She wiggled them, and the ring caught the light, glinting as garishly as the faux gold orbs on the Christmas tree behind her. Here, let me take that. Blake dipped his fingers into the strap of my messenger bag, cutting into my shoulder, and pretended to collapse. Christ, Meredith, whatever they've got you doing is way above your pay grade. He wasn't wrong. I was writing a grant for a multisensory playground installation at the local community center. So, don't you have anything to say to us? Sorry, I was just taking it in. Congratulations. I heard it go a little flat. I disliked Blake from the get-go, but I'd been trying to change my mind ever since Wanda had told me, smiling, that Blake didn't mind my burns. But Blake didn't mind her burns. He thinks they're sexy, she'd said, because they tell a story. He didn't make it easy. There was the Steelers logo he'd shaved into the back of his head last football season, the adages he spouted as haughtily as if he'd come up with them. Next to godliness, he said once as he squirted blue dish soap into a cast iron pan, and the way he'd blurted as if bestowing me with a precious gift. Just so you know, I'm totally okay with your lifestyle. Love is love. I followed them into the living room where the tree leaned threateningly into the open space. Babe, said Wanda, you said you were going to try to fix that. Shoot, you're right. Guess I got distracted by those delicious smells. Wanda turned to me. I made mulled wine, learned from a YouTube video. Here, I'll get you some. She came back with 2 mugs, orange peels floating in the maroon liquid. Listen, Meredith, I am so sorry about you and Larson, said Blake. Breakups are the worst. I'm really fine. It was for the best. I'd had to call last week to tell them Larson wasn't joining. What they didn't know, thank God, was that I was supposed to be the one showing off an engagement ring. I knew it wasn't reasonable, but I felt a bit like Wanda had pulled a fast one on me, stolen something for herself that was supposed to be mine. I leaned back in the armchair and its hinges squealed. So how are you guys? Well, your mother hasn't had a cigarette in 6 weeks, said Blake. Wow. I know. I quit too. All the money we're saving on health insurance, we're going to put it toward a couple's spa day when we make it to the new year. I told him I never smoked as far as Blue Cross knows, but he didn't listen, said Wanda, like Blake was a kid with a big imagination. She won't be so wrapped up in these technicalities when she's in a mineral soap with cucumber slices on both her eyeballs, said Blake, rubbing Wanda's thigh. I looked away. So, he said, can you believe it? A white Christmas. I always forgot he was from Arizona. Hadn't seen snow till he moved to Pennsylvania 2 decades ago. It's actually supposed to be record warm tomorrow, said Wanda. It'll probably melt as soon as it stops. Might hit low 50s in the afternoon. This way the ice will melt before Meredith and me have to get on the roads for dress shopping. How about that? Said Blake. You know what I say. Wanda and Blake spoke the words in unison, beaming. Everything happens for a reason. This had been their anthem ever since they met a year and a half before, when a holiday bonus sent Wanda back to the plastic surgeon who had done her original reconstruction. She'd been burned almost to death as an 8-year-old when her seersucker Oshkosh party dress caught on fire at a church bonfire. It had eventually made her one of those women, a pitied wife for the 2 decades she spent with my father, who made her keep covered up, wouldn't let her jog in tank tops, till he finally left her when I was in high school. The same day she went in for her procedure, she met Blake in the parking lot of the medical office park. He was getting a consult for laser hair removal on his back. Whenever Wanda's accident came up, Blake liked to drop the old everything happens for a reason and explain how, in a way, her accident had brought them together all these years later. As for why Wanda had to endure 3rd-degree burns to have the privilege of Blake's love, when all he had to do to earn my mother's was have a hairy back and a plumbing contractor's salary to burn, well, I'm sure Blake would have had a reason ready if I ever asked. I turned in early. Around 9, Blake winked at Wanda and said, if we don't go to bed soon, Santa won't come. I tried to forget that as I crawled beneath the polyester lilac comforter of my childhood bedroom, scrolling through my phone. My old college roommate, Rhoda, who I'd moved back in with after the split, had sent me a link to a Huffington Post article about infidelity. Apparently, it was the cool new thing to be cool with it. I deleted the message. Rhoda was always saying that I should go to therapy, but then Rhoda thought everyone needed counseling because she was a counselor, or more accurately, finishing her last semester of graduate school in counseling. I always half joked that I already had her for free. I wrote her back, not acknowledging the article, but to tell her about the engagement. There were 2 texts from Larson. The first was a plea to talk, which she'd sent nightly for 5 consecutive days now. The other was a photo of 6 wriggling dogs, skin pink as raw meat showing through white wisps of hair, red and green velvet bows around all their necks. Since her parents' business went under, they'd started breeding schnauzers. We could have one of these little dudes, she'd written. She knew how much I'd wanted a dog growing up, though my father thought they were dirty. On our first date 3 years ago, Larson had asked if my mom and I were close. I told her of an anonymous email sent to all the girls in my 7th grade class in which someone had copy pasted an AOL instant message conversation between 2 boys who'd ranked every girl in class from 1 to 10 and included explanations written in Comic Sans. Frantically, I'd found myself on the 2nd page. 4, body's an 8, but she has a mustache. Wanda heard me crying on the floor. Oh, kids are cruel, she said, when I explained. They'll be on to the next thing. Just you watch. Besides, this is nothing compared to what it was like for me in junior high. She petted my head absently, and I cried harder because I knew it was true, what she had always implied, that I was ungrateful. And now I had a mustache and a cold heart, both. The next day, I waxed my upper lip with strips I bought with my allowance at Revco. I left them on longer than the box said because I wanted to be sure, and they took a little skin off with the hair, left 2 raw, burning places. Larson had been floored when I'd told her the story, which I'd chosen partly because I wanted to see if she'd be disgusted by mention of my upper lip hairs. If she was, I'd know I didn't need to bother with a second date. I always give potential partners these kinds of little tests, and they rarely pass them, though women had better odds than men, which was why I concentrated my energy there. But Larson proved herself, or at least I thought so then. She was in finance, which was a strike against her when Rhoda set us up, but she explained on the first day that she'd chosen that major to help her parents save their ailing Kinko's franchise. Perhaps it had something to do with her jawline in the lantern light against the exposed brick of the bar wall, but I was taken with the idea of a 25-year-old woman who made real, tangible sacrifices for other people. The night she proposed, we walked along the crooked Schuylkill River, orange with mud and waning light. It was a few hours later in bed that she told me about the guy, at the very beginning, before we were serious. So stupid, she said, an experiment, just to make sure. She'd hated it, just like she figured she would. A bottle and a half of Rex Goliath after I ended it, the feeling that I'd swallowed something sharp gave way to the feeling that I should have known, some soured version of satisfaction. I woke up first on Christmas morning. Wanda had no real half and half, just Irish cream flavored coffee mate. Blake's influence, probably. I hate black coffee, so I used it anyway. When I closed the fridge, I noticed a photo of Wanda and Blake at a pumpkin patch, his cheeks smushed up against hers. It was stuck on with a magnet from Telluride that we'd always had, though nobody we knew had ever been there. In my childhood, that same magnet had held another photo. My parents in front of the courthouse on their wedding day, close but not touching, Wanda's feet swollen in her sandals from her pregnancy. Her hand rested on her abdomen as if she had acid reflux. I choked down much of the sweet, oily coffee as I could, then went to brush my teeth. There were 2 boxes of nicotine patches on top of the toilet, one bigger than the other, like his and hers. Something about that made me want to give a peace offering, and I remembered how the goofy lean of the Christmas tree needed fixing. Back in the living room, I knelt down next to the stand, the drying needles prickling my ear. I tried to right the angle, but one of the screws was missing. There would probably be a replacement in the shed, not that I necessarily know how to put it in, but I could try. Outside, I balked at the weirdly warm air. The sheen of ice on the pond was melting with popcorn cracks. My last visit home, Blake had tried fishing there, spent 3 hours on the rotting dock that could barely hold his weight before he finally pulled up a tiny trout that bled to death in his hand. Smiling all the while with bluing lips, Blake held the fish out proudly. Fish blood looked exactly like people blood. It gathered in the creases of Blake's fingers. He said that fishing made him feel closer to God. In the tool shed, I felt around for the grimy string that hung from the light bulb. Weak, musty light. As if someone had curated a museum of my childhood, there was the deflated snow tube, ripped apart by a snagged branch. A rope ladder I'd made when my father said he was going to redo the dock, but then never did. A box of My Little Ponies in the corner, dust in their cotton candy-colored hair. The latch to the tool closet was rusted, but it opened easily. Most of the hooks on the wall were empty, and a rusted Folgers can was filled with only nails, so I yanked at a drawer until it squeaked out. Some yellowed car repair receipts, which I lifted up in hopes that maybe a lone screw would be rolling around at the bottom of the drawer. I had forgotten all about the photos. We'd taken a few and put them on Facebook, pretending to be swimsuit models or whatever. This turquoise knit bikini that I can't believe I liked. One leg straight and one bent, hand on the knee, hair clumped from the water, as if the brown sludge of the lake in the background was the Miami skyline. Me and Nina, my first girlfriend, though nobody had known that's what we were, as I was terrified of it getting back to my father. The summer between sophomore and junior year of high school. He must have printed them off. There were striations of orange from an ink cartridge running low. Next to the photos, a jar of Vaseline with the top off, marred with slick indentations, as if it had been punched. When I slipped back into the house, Blake and Wanda sat close together at the kitchen table, slicing peeled grapefruits into segments. I saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus played through the radio static. Where have you been? Asked Wanda. Blake winked. Your mom hasn't had her coffee yet. He stood, kissed her on the top of the head. I thought I'd straighten out the tree for us, so I went hunting in the shed for an extra screw. Blake had his back to us now, measuring out coffee grinds, but I swear his hand froze for a moment. Can you help me with these? Said Wanda, handing me a knife. The chunks she'd already cut were piled in a bowl, red and raw as meat. A dish of saran-wrapped custard sat next to them. Wanda subscribed to a recipe mailing list, said Blake, then launched into something long-winded about some clients who had a house in the Poconos, how they were going to lend it to him for the honeymoon. I'll be right back, I said. In the bathroom, I sat on the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I stared at the cracks in the linoleum, filled with little hairs and dead spiders, till my vision wetted and blurred. I hated that I wasn't crying because of what happened. I was crying because I couldn't tell Larson about it. Okay, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I was in it. Oh, you could have kept going. I would have been good. But anyway, thank you, Rose. And just to let you know, you can read the rest of the story in the NCLR online issue. And then finally tonight, we'll be hearing from Nancy H. Williard. Nancy was born in North Carolina and returned in 2014 after 20 years in California's Eastern Sierra Mountains. She received her MFA from Queen's University of Charlotte in May 2020 and is currently working on a young adult novel about foster children. A librarian, educator, editor, and writer, her pieces can be found in Southern Women's Review, Long Story Short, Delta Women E-Zine, and Southern Review of Books. Nancy will read Wherever You Go, another Josephine Humphrey selection for honorable mention, and Josephine called Wherever You Go a powerful story about the need to escape from grief, from memory, from love, and the gradual realization that escape may be impossible. A clear streak of honesty runs through this story. So if we can please welcome Nancy H. Williard.
Thank you. Thank you. I really want to thank North Carolina Literary Review and North Carolina Writers Network and Queen's University for being so supportive of my efforts here. And it was a great honor to be chosen. With that, I'll head right in. Wherever you go. If we were smart, we would have been in bed asleep, since it was almost tomorrow. The three of us just sat by the fire pit, shivering, passing a pint of whiskey. Andy's voice rose above the sound of the waves lapping up against the boats and the boats knocking up against the dock of the marina. I had to be here at 5:30 in the fucking morning to haul the boats out for the morning load of fishermen who were still asleep for sure. But the stars were out and there was still wood to burn and whiskey to drink. Jeff could sleep in. Sunday was his day off. This was the last of the weekend money for me. Fishing season closes at Halloween, but the boss would lay us off soon. Andy was all wound up, talking fast like he did, telling me and Jeff everything we already knew about fish, boats, the lake, how to handle the tourists to get the best tips. He passed this huge doobie to me, which I waved off. The skunky smoke still floated my way. I had had just about enough of Andy's bullshit. I grew up here. I got quarters carrying tourist bags into the hotel when I was 10. Plus, I knew where the fish were. He didn't. But boss hired Andy as a favor to someone to be the assistant manager. He got the best money and free rent at the cozy trailer out back. Slick. Maybe boss took him in like a rescue dog. Andy was always flipping between his motor mouth, got it all in control, and a kind of heavy metal despair. I could handle him up, but down, no. Plus, he was a grown up. I mean, he was young, but like 30 or something. You could tell by the beer belly and the balding under his Fenwick ball cap. Maybe he was sent here for a geographical cure. You know, maybe if you move, everything will be all right. It's not you, it's them. My mother was at home worrying about me. I could just feel her knitting away with the TV on for noise, worrying about nothing. After a while, I knew I would get cold and not want to walk all the way back down to my house. If I texted her, she would be awake. She would put her Carhartt coat on over her pajamas, stick her feet in her old sorrels, and come and get me. She would be too tired to argue or complain. I'd be too fucked up to talk. We would ride in silent darkness, watching for deer to jump into the car's headlights. But that night, she came early, just showed up and sat down. She'd been at Donna's and she was still awake, no pajamas. That was the night Andy pulled out the 40 caliber pistol in front of her as we sat around in a circle at the fire pit. The gun was slick. It was a Springfield XD-40. The barrel was soft, purple black, and the golden lights flickering from the fire disappeared in the darkness of the barrel. Andy pulled out the clip and pulled open the slide to make sure there was nothing in the chamber as we all watched. Mom straightened up and pulled her coat around her. Each of us guys held it, balancing the weight, sighting down the barrel. My hand closed on it like it was mine. Even without the magazine, the muzzle tipped down, and I had to think to hold the weight of the thing tipped up. When I sighted down the barrel, I pointed at a star over the lake. The clip was heavy too. The bullets were huge, shiny copper cylinders in that clip. The 40 almost looked like a cartoon, a drawing of a gun, not a real thing. I wished I'd owned that instead of the 22 my dad left me. Yeah, my uncle gave me this because I needed to protect the property. Andy winked at my mom. Bears. The rest of us knew you didn't need to shoot the damn bears, but Andy was no local. My mom's pretty good at handling a gun, but Andy didn't know that. Her eyes got wide at his bragging, but she didn't say much about the gun as we all sat by the fire pit. She just walked away after a little bit so we could smoke one more joint and I could say my goodbyes. She was in the car listening to the radio when I got in. Are you sure he's going to be all right? Mom asked. That night was just another night. I thought she worried for nothing and I blew her off. What do you mean? Andy's cool. I said this, although I had been thinking the same thing. He was unknown, a new friend. It was not like we grew up together. Well, he seems pretty drunk to be playing with a gun. No, Mom, just mind your own business. He's cool. I'd been talking to her like that since Dad died, kind of snotty, but she pissed me off. She was always on me about something. We rode home with just the radio on. I was happy to see Mom out. She spent too much time at home in the little cabin lately, just work and home. We'd been through a whole 2 years, 2 winters since Dad died, and it was about time she got out. Before, Mom was always busy, always volunteering in our little town, talking to everyone and worrying about the old folks. Everyone she served breakfast to on her shift at the hot pot thought she was their best friend. Mom knew everyone's children and where they lived and how many grandchildren they had. My mom remembered that along with exactly which jelly they wanted with their toast. That's why she was such a good waitress. Dad had worked for the road maintenance crew. Back then, I was just a happy little kid. I remember the day they came to the door and told us. Mom fell on her knees, just crumpled up. The road crew driver came up to the door with the highway patrol officer. The officer said, all the stuff, what happened? Dad had been working late to get overtime and it was dark. A car blasted through the slow zone and either swerved or Dad stepped out. He died on impact, the officer said. The lawyer said maybe one day I would get some money to go to college, but the courts were slow and the insurance companies slower. The road crew helped us out for a while, but we got by, Mom and me. The morning after the fire pit night, when Mom dropped me off at the marina, the store door was still locked. Hey man, seen Andy? He had the keys and I can't bust the boats out because the keys are in the store. George came up to me hollering. He liked his routine, old George. He was about 100 and had been at the marina through 4 bosses. The boss was never around, but I knew he was up at the hot pot having breakfast. I called Mom on my cell phone and told her we needed the keys. Boss blasted up about 5 minutes later in his shiny new Jeep. What the hell? Can't you guys figure this out? That's why I pay Andy to sleep on the property. You go get the keys, he hollered. George shrugged like it wasn't up to him. Boss, he's asleep and he was up late and you know he can be. I tried to explain, but I could see the tourists beginning to pull into the parking lot and unload their fishing tackle from their SUVs. I gave up and walked towards the back of the marina. Go over there and wake his ass up, Boss roared after me and turned to smile and greet the fisherman. The trailer was a little 20-something odd foot stuck behind the garage where George fixed the motors and patched the boats. The grass was high around it, except at the entrance. Beside the stairs, there was a lawn chair with a silver ashtray stand, a dirty cooler, and a pile of whiskey bottles. All the faded orange curtains were closed tight. I climbed the stairs and pounded on the door. Andy, we need the keys. No answer. Andy, I'm catching hell out here from boss. Throw me the keys, man. No answer. I pulled on the handle and it turned. I opened it a crack and hollered again. Andy! Dumbass was probably passed out still. I stepped in and had to blink before I could make anything out. The first thing to hit me was the smell and the heat. The space heater was humming. Garbage and a bitter metal smell. The hair rose on the back of my neck and my knees began to tremble. In the orange light, I could just see a lump in the bed and what looked like paint splattered all over the headboard. I didn't know why, but I stepped in. Andy's foot was sticking out of the covers. I touched it and shook it a little. No response. The foot was ice cold. No, I said as I backed up and stumbled down the stairs. Outside, I threw up in the weeds. I heard George walking around the garage. Hey, I held my hand up to stop him. Go back. I got this. He turned, grumbling, marched back around the corner of the garage. No way did I want to have to deal with George. After a minute, I opened the door again and found Andy's pants on the chair. I slipped the keys out of the pocket. Outside with the door closed, I threw up again. I hoped that was over. I wiped my mouth and my eyes and taking a big breath, I went back to the store. Boss was still talking to impress the fishermen, pointing out the good spots for fish. I opened the store and waited until all the fishermen went in. While they were fingering the lures and lining up for the bathroom, old George made coffee. I pulled Boss aside. I have to say, Boss did well. His smile did not change when I told him. He kept waving at the fishermen, nodding like everything was just fine. Only his eyes changed. Andy's dead. I held his arm, slipped him the keys, and whispered, I think it was the gun. call the sheriff, Boss whispered, pulling me so close I smelled his coffee breath. Wait at the trailer and don't let anybody in. So I did all that. I spent the whole day standing in the sun, feeling nauseated, dealing with the sheriff and the county medical examiner. I had to repeat the story and write a statement and fend off tourists and children all day. When I finally got to the pier, I saw that Boss had called in Ben, who was part-time when we were busy. Ben was making a mess of putting the boats up and the tackle up, so I stepped in. See, turn the ropes like this so you can flip them off when the boats go out in the morning. The rope was cool, wet, and solid in my hand. The rhythm of pull the line, secure the rope, turn the winch, spray the boat clean, settled me. My mind let loose and I stared at the flickering sunlight on the lake as I moved back and forth. Bending over hurt my back after a while, and I straightened up and took a deep breath. Few old fishermen were still cleaning fish. Even fish guts smelled good at this point. The water sparkled and the breeze made me feel clean. Oh boy, some guy caught a 5-pounder, Ben said. Hey, where's Andy? I want to show him this lure. Never mind, I said. I'll tell you later. Of course, everyone in town knew in 10 minutes. When my shift was over, Mom came to get me and didn't wait for my call. When we got home, I went to my room without a word. She made my favorite dinner that night, spaghetti. I couldn't eat a forkful. I just went back to bed. I wondered what would have changed if anyone had listened to Mom or to Annie or to but nobody heard anybody. I certainly didn't. The next day, Boss handed me a bunch of garbage bags, a new plastic garbage can, and a shovel. Get Ben to help you clean out the trailer. No, I said. He was my friend. I'll do it. Boss would make me anyway. Time to man up. And I hope you read the rest of it.
I plan to, Nancy. And to let everybody know, you can also read the rest of Nancy's story in the online issue of NCLR 2021. And those are all open access, the online issues. You do not have to pay for them. And Nancy, I just want to say you read beautifully. I was sitting there like they should have had her be the MC instead of me. Like, what am I even doing? So thank you all for reading tonight. They were all beautiful, and I'm excited to read the rest. And speaking of beautiful, if anybody wants to submit their stories to NCLR, you will see how beautiful the layouts in these magazines are as well. And I know you're going to want to get your fiction submitted and published in these pages because they really are very beautifully laid out. And so go ahead and submit your fiction to the competition for the opportunity to see your writing in our pages. And again, that deadline is coming up Sunday, so don't delay. And now I have been given the highly undeserved opportunity and honor to announce, you heard it here first, that all 3 of our short stories this evening and all 3 of the authors you see before you are among NCLR's 6 nominations for a pushcart prize this year. So congratulations to everybody for that. And they were all submitted over the summer for O. Henry prizes as well. So everybody is just prizes all over the place this evening. So, and just to let y'all know, another coup of submitting to the Betts Prize competition is the possibility of receiving these nominations. And you can add those to your writing credits and just, say it to yourself every once in a while. I have a pushcart prize. So stay tuned, at least figuratively, not right now, to find out whether any of these are selected for these honors. And then, as I mentioned previously, NCLR editor Margaret Bauer, who is right here in the middle of my screen, is ready to answer questions about entering the Betts Prize competition. And also we invite questions for our authors. So if anybody wants to ask a question, go ahead and write it in the chat and I'll be happy to read it out. Or if you would prefer, just put question in there and then I can call on you and you can ask the question yourself. So, And Miss Jane Gatewood says, congratulations, as does Ed Southern. So we'll sit here for just a second. And if anybody has questions, go ahead. We're ready to go. The forum is open.
I'll add my thanks while y'all are thinking of questions too. I really appreciate you coming out tonight and sharing your stories and showing what amazing fiction we've been publishing since we started publishing the Doris stories, I think in 2007.
Margaret, I have a question. I love how the artwork is matched up to the stories, and not just these, but the essays and the poetry. How does that happen? I mean, how do you have artists in mind, or what's that process?
We have an art editor. Her name is Diane Rodman, and she's amazing at selecting art for the creative writing. She reads your stories, the poetry, some of the creative nonfiction, some of it, we use photographs from the author, but others not. And she just kind of goes through, she's got lots of websites, and over the years, she's become more and more familiar with more and more artists to find a compliment, not an illustration, but a compliment to the writing. And she'll send me these wonderful emails where she explains why she picked so-and-so or what art. And I begged her to let me share that. She said, no, you have to let the reader do their own thing. I don't want to impose my views on the reader, but she just shares with me, and I just find it fascinating. I'm glad you appreciate it. I will pass that on to her.
Okay, so now we have a question from Tita Ramirez, and this is for Molly. Tita says, can you talk a little bit about writing from a child's point of view, the pros and cons and the difficulties?
Hi, Tita. Thank you. Thank you for coming, everybody, and thanks for the question. One of the mechanical difficulties was I felt like I said her daddy, her mother constantly, because it was a third person close, and that I tried to find ways not to do that, but that was just a little mechanical problem. Like, I'm not going to use these characters' first names because it is through Carol's perspective. The other problem that I ran into was for a 12, 13-year-old girl who's starting to figure out some things about the world and about her parents. How do you dole that out slowly, because it would take her time to put things together that put all these little things together that are adding up to her dad in particular, disappointing her in some ways by the end of the story. And how does that timing work for a 12 or 13-year-old to put together adult things that are going on around them? And actually, Holly Goddard-Jones helped me with that a whole lot. This was one of the stories that I wrote. Was she your advisor too, Rose? Oh, she's amazing.
She's so great. She's really good.
She's so good. And an early draft. So this is one of my thesis stories at UNCG's MFA program that Rose also attended. And she helped me figure out that this 13-year-old was figuring out stuff a little too quickly, and it needed to be a little bit more subtle. So I would say that was one of the things. Other than that, like I really enjoy getting into that space of that liminal age, 12, 13 years old, when you're not a kid, but you're not an adult. Any other thoughts from other writers about this challenge of writing from a young person's perspective?
Nancy, you might address that too, given your story.
Yeah, I was gonna step in there because not only is my story, a young adult, but it's also a young man, and that I really had to work to wrap my head around that, and listen to his voice was the main guidance that I got going through that. And then as the story goes on and time goes on, to be able to change his voice so that you have not this young man, this high school kind of young man, but then you have a 20-something, and how does that change? And the only thing that I can say that really helped was listening to students and, kind of getting that voice in my head that that's how they would talk at the different ages. But it's really tricky.
So I have a question following up on that, actually. And I'm not a writer myself, but this is just me being curious. For anybody that's writing from a perspective that is not their own, like for example, Nancy, you said you were really having to listen to his voice. When you're writing from a perspective that you have not yourself experienced, how do you listen to that voice? How do you get material, I suppose? How do you get comfortable with that, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. So, the old thing about the writer who goes to the coffee shop and sits there in the coffee shop and writes the story from what's going on in the coffee shop. Well, I think you need to be that kind of writer. I think you need to be listening all the time in order to have those voices in your mind. I wrote another story recently that was about a person who has dementia and how would they think, and that's another trip off into a totally different land. And I think as a writer, you like to do that. You don't want to write your story unless it's a memoir. You want to add to it. So listening and always writing it down.
Rose, I'm curious if you have thoughts about that too, because this is a huge question in the writing world. Who gets to write and tell other people's stories? And I think one of the answers is you can write stories from other perspectives from your own, but you have to do your research in every way possible, not just in the books. And if you screw up, you're responsible for that.
Yeah.
You write something that doesn't resonate for someone who identifies as your, somehow similarly to your character, then you'll hear about it.
Yeah.
Rose, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, listening, as you said, and research, I feel like are in some ways the same thing in this case, right? Because, if there's somebody in your life who you're close to, who has a certain identity and you've been listening to them just talk to you as a friend for your whole life, then you're going to have a sort of fluency there that's not perfect, but like is going to be different than if you just sit down and decide like, oh, I want to write about a person who's had X, Y, and Z experience, for some sort of like some reason that's not necessarily something that's like organic to a specific story that you really want to tell. And so, yeah, and I think in terms of the voice piece of the question, I love to just like play around a lot with voice at the beginning of the story and have characters describe different things in ways and try to see how they would describe them in a different way than I might, and like what experiences in their past would lead them to describe something that way, as opposed to the experiences in my past that would lead me to describe it that way. But those are just, musings I have. I don't think I have a, I don't think I really know. I don't think I have a stance on it yet, because it feels really complicated.
And I want to add in that often people will say, well, your character will not ring true. Your character will not be a full-bodied character if you haven't done the research and if you're not able to give that voice. So that's another thing to think about, is how true your character is to the reader.
I think that's one of the things Josephine Humphreys commented on all your stories. was kind of the truthfulness of them in different ways that she praised in making those selections. I have a question for all the writers in here as the editor. I always like to take an opportunity to ask writers, we've been managing this competition for some years now, and in recent years, rather than wait until we have the winner and the finalist, we've been releasing, sending preliminary, here's where we are in the contest, after preliminary screening, telling people, okay, you're still in, you're not. And then when we pick the finalists, doing it again. It goes back. I know that in writing now, it's okay to multiple submit. When I first started 25 years ago, that was not really a thing. And so, it's not like they're just there, but part of mine is hoping, we won't get down to a winner and the story's already been picked up. But also let people know so they can kind of move on with those stories. So I'm always curious how the writers feel about that. Any?
Like
Well-
about the structure
About
of
kind of getting those updates, or, if you were one of the ones let out after the first round.
I think it's kind of a blessing because then you can focus on knowing you need to make the story better, or find a place that's a better fit for it.
Yeah.
You saved me with that email, Margaret, saying that we were finalists. And then the one, I guess it was like a day or two before Christmas with the results, because for all that 2020 was, it was not like the best year. And for me, my first novel manuscript made its way out and got rejection after rejection after rejection. And so getting that email from you gave me the little lift to get along, And
I will say it's my favorite thing is the days I get to send out the results. It's like, because that's when I go and match up names and story titles and things like that, and find out about y'all. Because this year, I didn't know any of you. Sometimes I'll recognize a name, other times not. Was it the first time the three of you had submitted to our contest or not?
Mhm.
Yes.
It was?
Yes.
I think I had submitted at least once before, maybe
Okay.
twice before.
Okay, good.
Yeah. To me, it made my Christmas. It was like the whole year had been really sucky. And then this, and I was just like, so it made my Christmas. And in the overall scheme of things, I do a lot of simultaneous submission. And so when I know I'm not chosen, that's great for me because it's like, okay, I figure I'm not a fit there, and I can just move on.
Mhm.
Well, just keep in mind, you might be a fit with a different story. So, and there's no rules against submitting more than once, again, winning more than once, et cetera, et cetera. We have had people who've at least won second place a couple of years. I can't remember if it was 2 years in a row or 2 years with a year in between. That happened once. One time, one of our honorable mentions got accepted somewhere else too. So we didn't end up getting to publish his work. But I said, but do mention that you got it when you published the story. So it was award winning.
Well, and if they're just along that note, if there are any like aspiring writers or people who are submitting for the first time watching, because that was me like just a couple of years ago, I had gotten a lot of rejections on this story before I got this honorable mention. So I almost didn't submit because I was like, why would I expect that like, I'm going to win this contest when like so many people don't like it, but there's just so many different factors in these things. And it's like, if you keep trying, things will happen.
Yeah.
So it's cool.
Oh yeah, I think I counted the other day. I had an essay accepted, and I went back and checked, and I think it had been rejected 13 times. I think that's my high number right now, but we'll see. I don't know. Well, Any other thoughts? Any other questions about the contest? Any other questions for our writers? Because I want to say my thanks too. I want to say congratulations on being selected for the pushcart nominations. I'm very excited about that. It was just a whim to say, oh, we should, usually I send an email, but I thought I would go ahead and use tonight as a celebration. It is one of the perks of being submitting your story to this competition. The winner almost always is among our selections, and then the others, you never know. Because editors only get to submit 6 out of all their issues that year. So this year it just happened that we picked 3 fiction, and can't tell you any more than that until I let those other writers know too. And let's see, what else did I want to tell you about? Halloween deadline. Lots of bonus gifts offered tonight. If you submit, I made a list of who's here. If you submit to the contest, we will put in the mail to you a 2016 issue featuring Ed Southern's essay about the writing estate. North Carolina is the writing estate. And thank you to Ed for doing this for us tonight. I really appreciate it. And the North Carolina Writers Network. Remember that Sarah, your wrong name on there threw me off. I was like, who's Kitsy again? So remember that Sarah told you that the North Carolina Writers Network's fall conference is coming up. So you should, all writers, fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, you should attend. It's great. I got in the nonfiction class. I'm very excited to go. Now I have to find somebody to sit at my table so that NCLR can be there too. And then join the network, become a part of this wonderful community that we have. And we hope too you'll subscribe. If you subscribe to NCLR or buy a copy of the 2021 issue to read the rest of Molly's story, which is published in our 30th print issue, we'll be sending you a free copy of 2015 featuring the interview with Monique Trong. I think that I've gone back over everything. Sarah, did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I think it would have been a good idea, if you want people to submit to the contest, you should have told them that they can't read the rest of the stories unless they do.
Well, we did put links in the chat for those of you to find it. All you have to do too is go to our website and click on online, NCLR online, or click on issues and then NCLR online. And you can read 2 of the 3 stories. Those of you who have access to a university library, if you don't have the issue, you can still read Molly's story. And we still get a few pennies every time somebody clicks on it through a library. So that's something too. Support your writers and please continue to submit. And thank you all for attending. This has been great. I appreciate it. Thanks to our writers. Another round of applause for our writers.
Thank you.
And thanks again, Ed. We appreciate you. Ed's in behind the scene because he also has a toddler. No, she's not even a toddler anymore. I forgot. She's getting. I keep forgetting how time goes on. A child in the background. So, but anyway, we appreciate you, Ed. We're glad you're out there, and appreciate all of you for coming.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks, Sarah. I can't believe I almost forgot to tell you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Good night.
Good
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Sarah, so much.